together. So we tend to steer with either PowerPoint or some other document, talking about decisions that we're trying to take or approaches we're taking or messages we're sending to other people, like a retailer who's making decisions about what to put on their shelf. I tend to have those things bounced off me and have a perspective or just head nod a lot during the day, which sometimes is important and accomplishes a lot as well. Just stepping back for a minute from scheduling, I tend to spend a lot of my day either helping a team feel good about the decisions they were already coming to, which usually comes in the form of a recommendation to me, or helping them see something in a new and different way without taking away the responsibility and ownership from the team or the person themselves. So that's an important kind of way to frame when I disagree with a recommendation. My task is usually to make sure that the team or the person feels motivated to attack it in a new and different way, understands the additional thinking maybe that I brought to the table from different experience or a broader perspective, and feels like if they had it to tackle again, given that perspective, they would tackle it in a similar way. Sometimes it's not as clean as that. Sometimes it has to be more, agree to disagree, where I just have a different perspective, and maybe it's subjective. But those tend to be the least motivating situations. So generally speaking, I like to defer to those that are closest to the business and to making a good decision, and steer their perspective a little bit where necessary to hopefully lead them in an even better place to make decisions on their own in the future. So that's kind of stepping back, average day with my responsibilities, daily duties. Did that cover it, Juan?
Yeah. The answer was yes.
Okay, good.
Everybody out there, you have to, well, first of all, I just talk loud anyway, as you guys know, but I'm closer to the microphone, so if you say yes, make sure you say it loud, because otherwise Eric doesn't pick up very well on the mic here. Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No, great. So the next question's from, is it Rainier?
Rainier, yeah.
Rainier.
Way
Okay,
down
great.
on the end. I don't know if you can see him.
I don't think so.
Can you wave again, Rainier? Actually, here. Hang on. Now wave.
Hi, Rainier. Sorry I butchered your name. Good. Rainier's question was, do you look for specific skill set or personality when forming a team? Wow, yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is actually what I said about what I picked up from my experience, and that is ability to learn, willingness to learn. Usually it's more the latter, willingness to learn, the humility to learn. Often I'm interviewing people with experience in the industry, and often they believe that in an interview their job is to appear the expert. And so in that context, if they're not appearing not only like somebody who knows what they're talking about and can bring a level of confidence to the job, but they're also appearing like they can learn from their experience and be self-critical and adjust course, then that can be a challenge. I look for that definitely. Of course, I also look for a positive and motivating personality. That's critical for a team to want to work together, and for a team to both approach things in a positive manner and also approach challenges in a problem-solving manner or failure in a resilient manner. If you can't understand what went well, or what about your approach was working, then it's very hard to recover from setbacks. Positivity is something I look for as well. Then skill set, depending on what the job is, basic skills and ideally experience, but at least transferable skills, usually a mix of both, on the task at hand. So if I'm hiring somebody to focus on pricing analytics to get our pricing right in market, which sounds simple but can be incredibly complicated across multiple retailers and across time and seasonal businesses and across different products. what we call SKUs, stock keeping units. Those types of jobs are really specialty jobs. They've got to be able to analyze data, and so ideally they've done it before or studied under somebody who has. So I guess a combination of the specific skill sets for the job and some of those personality traits that are really important in any job in a team-oriented matrix setting. By matrix, I mean different functions working together to accomplish common goals, which describes most of large company endeavors, and I would argue most of any sector endeavors: education, nonprofits, government, etc. I missed one. Is it Mazen or Mazan? I'm going back now.
Neither of the two. It's Mason, and I messed it up. I screwed up the first time too, Eric.
Okay, Mason.
That's Mason. That's Mason up there.
Hello. If time goes back and you could change one thing about your career, what would it be? Wow. No, I don't like to look backwards and think about changing. I feel like I've learned something from everything. I'm trying to think. Well, maybe I'll spin it in a different way. I think when I started out in this career, I was thinking very short term. And I got into packaged goods thinking it was a great extension of business education, and it would let me run small businesses very quickly and then move on to other things in more exciting categories. I grew up in what's now Silicon Valley up in Northern California and thought I would end up in tech. I have two brothers in tech still today, and were back then. The learning that I would say, and what I would change, or what I would tell my younger self, is making sure that you're focused on not only what it is you can take and generalize and use somewhere else, but also what you really like. I think I discovered over time that I liked the industry that I was in more than I expected to. And got kind of addicted to the dynamics and the multifaceted approach you need to take in this business, and decided I liked it. But I wasn't really sure of that for 2 or 3 or 4 years. I was 2 or 3 years at least. And so I kind of missed an opportunity to just enjoy myself a little bit more, which I think is important at every stage of your career. One of the things that I found, and I think it answers a later question, that's been really important to me over time is one of the key drivers of success career-wise is simply liking what you do and getting up out of bed in the morning to and looking forward to it. And if you hit phases where you don't feel that way, that you need to make a change either in your own attitude or in the job or company that you're with. So I think I would go back and give myself a little career management advice. And that's probably the single biggest thing I would change. There's not any big thing that I look back on and regret. So I'm lucky in that way, I guess. So going to Brian, do you find managing managers difficult? Actually, there were two questions around that. And do you have any advice for being effective at this? You know, this is going to sound like a happy-go-lucky answer, but I find managing managers much easier than managing folks that have never managed other people. The honest truth is, once you manage people, you get a bit more humble about what your boss is trying to do with you, and you also get a bit more thoughtful in the way that you act to the people around you, because you know that you're kind of always on stage with your teams, your peers, and certainly the people who work for you or on your team. So I find it easier to manage managers than to manage frontline folks that don't have experience or current responsibility managing other people. So I don't find it more difficult. It is a bit more difficult when you get, and this gets to another question later in the list, when you end up in a more, I think somebody called it upper management, and I don't know what that is, depending on what stage of your career is at. There's always somebody you're reporting to, and there's usually somebody that has job responsibilities that you don't have to worry about every day, whether they're in your core competence and that person works for you, or whether it's somebody who's a peer but they're working on something on your behalf, on the behalf of something that you're trying to get done as well. So the kind of my overall view is when you're trying to get things done through other people, which is another way to look at managing managers, there's always an additional challenge of something's got to be heard, believed, and then not just acted on, but passed on to other folks when it's a message that you're sending. Or there's the additional challenge of really understanding what's going on in someone's head and whether they understand the task or whether they actually truly think a task or something you're hoping they get done is important relative to everything else that they need to worry about during a day. And so that, in my mind, is the hardest part of managing managers. It's not so much managing managers of other people, but getting work done through other people, which applies to everyone at every stage of their career. And I think the one thing that I would give as advice in that situation is to ask questions and truly listen. And there's really no substitute for trying to understand what's going on in someone's head and how they're approaching a problem, and where you're potentially disconnected in the way you're thinking about either the importance or the how-to, either the why or the how of getting something done. So that's how I would answer that question, and I think that knocked a few down. We're going to go faster as we go, I guess, because if I remember right, that answered a couple of other questions. What would be your dream job if I didn't do what I'm doing right now? Wow, some days I feel like I'm doing a dream job, and other days, you feel like a meeting is a drag or something like that. In general, I think if I couldn't work here and I had to snap my fingers and work somewhere else, I think I would still be in a consumer goods business. I find that incredibly motivating and fun. I really look at early stage consumer goods and sometimes envy what they're doing when they're building from scratch and not working with a well-developed and large business that you have to keep healthy while you go after new opportunities and growth. My career is much more in these larger businesses where right now I've got 2 businesses that sell at retail for over $1 billion each. So these are big businesses, and when something tactical, for example, is going wrong, other new ideas can't replace what's going wrong. So you tend to fight fires a little bit more and keep the business healthy when something is unhealthy. Those tasks tend to fill a good portion of your time versus getting to focus on building something new. On the other hand, when you're working on those larger businesses, you tend to have the resources, the brain power, and the people power to go get really interesting things done. So I'm not sure that my dream job would be one of those smaller kind of startup upstarts, as much as trying to do that from the chair of a larger business that's got the resources and the capabilities that are already built that let you accomplish more things quicker and in a bigger way. But sometimes I envy the folks that are building businesses either from scratch or from a very small place into a totally new space and try and do that with the businesses that are in my responsibility. Jennifer Chan, I'll answer her question next. It's what was the transition like with the acquisition of Hillshire Brands? So I work for, this is a good question, particularly for me, because I work for Tyson Foods, but I joined Hillshire Brands before it was acquired by Tyson. So for about 6 months I worked for Hillshire Brands as a new employee, and then we were bid on and we were acquired in the end by Tyson Foods. By bid on, I mean a few different companies were interested in buying the company. And then we started going through an integration of the two companies about 18 months ago. So we're a year or 18 months into all the activities that integrate the two companies. The transition was busy and uncertain early in the stages. It became busy and very successful, I would say. I've been through a few transitions or major big company changes, and this one has been amazingly successful, and I would say for one key reason. The two companies that were brought together were very different in the way they approached things, but they had very common values. So the companies were similar in the difference they wanted to make, in the importance they saw in using food as a way to make people's lives better and make a difference in the world. But they were very different in the way they approached it. Tyson Foods historically has been a very lean operator, a commodity company that was good at operating in a commodity-based environment. They struggled when they tried to really add value and build brands. Hillshire Brands was a company that was built on building brands and was not very good at the back end, or not as good, I would say, not nearly as good, or as scaled, as big, at the back end of becoming efficient, running an efficient organization behind the scenes so that you can offer lowest possible pricing and make good money. And so recognizing each other's strengths and that they were complementary, that each needed the other, was one of the things that made the transition after the acquisition really, really smooth compared to other transitions that I've seen. And still today keeps us really focused on working together and bringing out the best in both legacy organizations that are coming together. Does that help answer the question, or I'm going to keep moving until I see people waving and screaming?
I think it does. Jennifer's actually not here, so
okay.
I'm gonna field whether you sufficiently address that, and I think yes for now, because there's some questions further down that I want to make sure we get to. But if we get through everything, then it'd be interesting to go back and talk about the phenomenon of mergers between large companies a little bit more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we'll come back to it. So we can come.
I think you can go on for now.
So Floor asked, what are the qualities you look for when you're forming teams that will perform? So I already talked a little bit about the individual qualities in individuals, rather. I think that the humility and learning one that I talked a bit about is important for a high-performing team as well. The other kind of key quality is you have to have people that like to work in teams, particularly in larger companies. There is no escape. There are very few individual contributor jobs where you can kind of hide in the basement and get your work done and be effective at it. The vast majority of important work gets done across people and as teams. And so it's got to be a love for working with other people and respecting the expertise of other people, and just forming the trust and shared responsibility, but at the same time individual accountability that gets things done in teams. So I think some people are naturally suited to that, and others struggle with a team environment. And it's really important in larger companies that people develop the capabilities, whether or not they have the natural qualities or not, to work successfully in those team environments. And some of that is the humility and learning. Some of it is just liking to work together and to find the good in other people, and to assume positive intent in others. Because if you're constantly assuming political motivations, or that folks are self-interested, or folks are self-interested or politically motivated, then team dynamics break down very quickly, and it becomes a struggle to get things done together versus the key to success of the company. So I think those qualities are probably the things I would add to what I said earlier. Ashlyn, if I'm not butchering that name, asked, what is the best way for a small business to market their product?
Eric, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
And so that people in the audience are talking to. Ashley, can you describe a bit to Eric the idea you're working on? I think it would put your question in context.
I'm working on starting a bakery of my own.
Sorry, can you repeat it or say it a little louder?
I'm working on starting a bakery of my own, and so maybe the insight of a small business would help.
Yeah, okay, great. So I have less experience in that space, but I think the core things that make packaged goods succeed are really similar in the small business space. from what I've seen and learned. And the most important thing is understanding what are the musts of core delivery to the customer base, and then what are the areas where you will choose to excel. So what are your points of differentiation? Some folks call that what gives you the right to play and what gives you the right to win. And that's the terminology I tend to use in my organization. So for every small business, those things may be different, but it's also important for every small business to recognize what are the things you have to be good at, the price of poker in the game that you're choosing to play, and whether you're consumer-oriented or B2B-oriented, there are always those core things where you just have to nail them in order to be in business, in order to stay in business. And then over the long term, at least, and ideally right from the beginning, wired up from the beginning, what are those things where you will choose to excel, where you will have an advantage versus your competition, or strive constantly to build advantage versus your competition. And it's important that those things that you're striving on really matter to a specific customer base. So that's probably the third piece that's important, is a real keen focus on who your target is, whether that's a business target or a consumer target. I obviously have most experience with consumer targets, and choosing a target, even if you want to be bigger than that target, that is going to be your kind of what we call an opportunity target, that you're going to stay focused on, you're going to get to know, and you're going to wow and create a raving fan out of. That process is, in my view, the same for any size business, whether you're a $10 billion business or bigger, or a $10 business. You need to know what it is you've got to be good at and what it is you've got to be best at than the competition. And those things can be unique for different businesses. Sometimes there's things that anybody trying to play in a space need to be good at, but every business needs to place its own bet on where it wants to be different. And frankly, if everybody's trying to be different in the same way, then there's a better opportunity. Because differentiating is part of what keeps businesses from just doing a share fight for a fixed pie. And generally speaking, being better at something than everybody else is a dynamic process that's important to separating yourself from the pack, being able to charge more or retain customers more successfully, and in the end be successful as a business, which means successful financially. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Eric, I would suggest that you skip the next one from Javier Contreras because he's not here and it's similar to Ashland's question, and move down to Haley Dilbeck's question.
Okay, what is one characteristic you admire about a person you are interviewing? I think, I hate to be a broken record, but I admire people talking about tough experiences that they've had, that they've learned something from. So for me, this brings out in an interview situation, which can be an unusual place to be humble and to demonstrate learning. It brings out that kind of humility and learning that I think makes a lifelong learner and a capable and adaptable individual in a dynamic marketplace or a dynamic organization. So that's probably the most important characteristic that I find admiration for. I also look for, and this relates to the question, so I'll bring it up as well, individual and personal pride in something that someone has accomplished. So often someone will come in with a resume, even really experienced people with a resume where they've clearly had to, be very tight and cut things that are also important. They still sometimes have a hard time really demonstrating enthusiasm for what they have accomplished, or picking one thing and being tight about this one thing I'm really proud of. So that's one of my favorite interview questions, is what are you proud of? Everyone has their different interviewing style, but often interviewers are looking for folks to demonstrate pride and to demonstrate learning or humility from tough situations. So those aren't questions to shy away from when people ask them of you in an interview, because they're some of the most important questions to demonstrate personal traits that will be critical to your long-term career inside the company.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, I just scrolled, so let me get reoriented. So Alyssa asked, what would help someone on a ground level position work their way up to a corporate management position? Wow, I think no matter what position you're in an organization, being the person that is making your boss's job easiest is probably the single biggest predictor of promotability. Because it's the way that a boss interprets whether somebody can do the next job, and also it's the way that builds rapport with a supervisor, which at an entry level is critically important. Doing your job well, but also making sure that you are the go-to person for your boss sets you up for promotion. And I think that's true at almost every level of an organization. If you report to the CEO, it's still true. Your job is to make the CEO's job easy in whatever your area of expertise or your line of business. And those things, making your boss look good, isn't necessarily one thing, but through that screen, I think everything that's important to getting promoted is can be measured through that kind of filter, that screen. Good. Lichen, or is that right?
You got it right, Eric.
All right.
I said Lucien at first, but it's Lichen. You were right.
Good. Lichen, just a lucky guess. Your question was, what is the biggest difficulty of being an upper-level manager? I think I talked to that earlier. I think the one thing that's maybe there's two. One is having to always get things done through other people. So I don't do a whole lot of work anymore. I say that with a smile on my face, of course, but it's honestly true. In an organization, when you've been around for 5 or 10 years in any organization or in an industry, you tend to be shaping people's opinions and approach more than you're actually the one getting the work done. And so that creates its own set of challenges, and that probably is one of the biggest challenge. And then the flip side of the same thing, that can be incredibly inspiring. And for some people, it can also be a bit of a drain, where they get frustrated working through other people, or they just get frustrated with feeling like they're in meetings all day and not accomplishing anything personally. So that transition to not just management, but being a manager of managers can be uninspiring for some folks. And I've seen people really kind of burn out and decide to go different ways and go back to a manager level, et cetera, because they feel more comfortable and more inspired by getting the work done or directly steering the work of other people. So it's not for everybody, but it can be incredibly rewarding to help not only people succeed at their jobs, but help the organization succeed because you're helping people get better at their jobs. And in some ways, it's a lot like an education role, being a professor in an academic program, or being a teacher in an earlier stage. Helping people get good at their roles is part of getting things done through other people. So I personally enjoy it quite a bit, but that can be that's a big transition for people to go through. Who has been your greatest inspiration?
Eric,
wow.
if I can jump in for a second there. Yep. That question is from Christian Duarte, who is in some ways an inspiration to all of us here in the class because he's not here, and it's for a good reason. He's on a rookie contract with the Portland Timbers right now, the Major League Soccer franchise. So I wanted to give credit because almost the exact same question also came from Miguel. It's further down in the list because Duarte starts with D and Rivera starts with R. But I just wanted to point out there that Miguel also had the exact same question. It's going to come down later in the list. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think there's so many people. I mean, there's so many people that I gather. Just to finish my thought, there's so many people that I gather inspiration from, and I think that's one important aspect of life in general. Is life throws you curveballs. It throws everybody curveballs, and one of the best ways to be inspired to tackle curves and to problem solve in the end is to find inspiration in everybody else's problem solving. And the cheesy answer that I would give is the those who give me the most inspiration in my current job assignments are usually my competition. Companies, especially big companies, tend to get caught up in their own internal discussions and challenges. And so I always try and get focused on where I think competition is doing something better and try and be as objective as possible in that. Because sometimes we have to match or exceed our competitors in the way they approach problem solving. And especially the way they approach solving the same consumer's problem when we're competing for the same consumer or the same end customer. And so I actively seek and try and find inspiration in what competitors are doing. So one area in my business now, I manage the Tyson brand, which is, you guys are in Foster Farm country, so it's hard to convey how important of a brand we are because we're not as important out there. We're more of a direct competitor with Foster's on the West Coast. On the East Coast, the Tyson brand, which is the largest by far national brand of poultry, is competing against a company called Purdue. If anybody's from out there, you know the Purdue brand. It's it's little known on the West Coast. Purdue just announced that they're taking their entire complex antibiotic free, or what's called in the industry no antibiotics ever, which is a even further evolution of reducing or eliminating antibiotics in raising poultry. And this is important not just because consumers are looking for this, but it also has an externality effect in that poultry and in general animals for food that are raised with antibiotics as part of the raising process tends to sensitize germs to antibiotics, and at times over the long term can reduce the effectiveness of antibiotics for humans as well. So it's a very important long-term issue that the medical community has gotten involved in, and in some cases government, but usually interest groups and often companies and individuals within companies get involved in as well, tackling as a problem to solve. So Purdue has leaned way out there in this and not only been a leader in trying to bring responsible use of antibiotics into animal raising practices, but as has Tyson as well. But Purdue has gone even further, and it looks like they're about to convert everything that they sell on the East Coast into a no antibiotics ever, which means not in the shell, not as a chick, and not during the entire life cycle of an animal using antibiotics, which is a very high standard, higher than we raise our own children with. And so in my mind, that's an example of finding inspiration. I'm not sure we will follow with our entire business. Everywhere in every piece. There's a cost upcharge. There's an affordability issue related to the cost upcharge when you're providing products that people buy using food stamps. You have to be sensitive to that as well. And there's, let's say, long-term practices that are also important to how we raise animals that are in conflict with some of the things that they're doing. So I'm not sure we're going to imitate, but I admire and am inspired by their leadership in pushing beyond what the industry has designated together as the minimum standard and what the government has designated as a minimum standard, and trying to push the envelope on where we could go as an industry. So that's an example, I guess, a concrete example of finding inspiration from competition. Where was I now? I lost my place. There's green all over the place. Jeremy, you're trying to help me.
Yeah,
Sorry,
everything that's green you've covered. White you haven't covered. And if you scroll down, blue are the ones that I thought were particularly interesting to make sure we get to.
Okay, great. So I will scroll to blue, and then we'll go back through white.
Okay.
So does Tyson Foods independent farmers practice factory or sustainable farming? Wow, okay.
Can I actually, you talked about that a little bit too, and can I actually jump in on that? Because there's a question that's not in here that I think would be interesting. Like, you're largely in the poultry space, but, or meat, more, like animals in some way, shape, or form more broadly. Which is not the main focus of agriculture here in Kern County. But Kern County is the second leading agricultural producer as a county in the nation, just in terms of raw volume and dollars.
Yeah.
And I was curious, since you are in the packaged food business, if you could sort of segue off of that to talk about any overlaps in your world with what we do out here with citrus, with nuts, with in particular, there's a lot of nut, citrus, and table grape growing that goes out out here. And I was just curious. You and I have never talked before about the food business.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting for you to talk a little bit about agriculture is hugely important here in Kern County, and I've never heard the opinion of somebody on the consumer packaged goods side of basically the tail end of the value chain that in some ways starts here in Kern County.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm no expert in Kern County's key businesses, but I can speak to how we think about things. And I work in two different businesses when it comes to this. On the Tyson business, the Tyson branded business, we tend to be vertically integrated all the way back. So we are a feed buyer, so we're buying corn, to make it simple, as feed for chickens, for raising chickens. We contract with family farmers primarily, independent farmers in all cases. We have small learning farms, but basically we don't do our own farming and animal raising. And then we buy we provide the feed and buy the animals from independent farmers. So that's a very vertically integrated business, or what we consider to be vertically integrated. We're not growing our own grain, et cetera, but it's pretty vertically integrated by our industry standard. On the other side of things, Jimmy Dean, for example, we are much more in the final packaged goods phase of things, where we're buying cheese or eggs that are made by others, ready to be put into sandwiches. And so we have a say about the attributes, raising practices, all of that. But we are not we're not nearly as involved up the value chain, or back into the value chain. So I see a little bit of all different sides of this. I think overall, when we talk about sustainable farming, I am by no means an expert. But I do know that companies of the size that Tyson Foods is of, and many of the companies that are in Kern County, I would imagine, on a smaller scale, fall into this bucket, are trying to, in a large sense, air quotes again, feed the world, and try and provide solutions that best meet the needs on a relatively large scale, because the needs of the world are large scale. And so when you think about what people feed their families a night across 300 plus million households, we are trying to provide solutions that scale up to those challenges. Maybe not all 300 million, but when you're going for a decent enough share in consumer packaged goods that you have enough of a shelf presence to be found by a consumer interested in finding you, you have to talk in the tens of millions of dollars in business to make it worth going after pieces of business, or to create new methods or new attributes in those pieces of business. So when we talk about sustainable farming, we're talking about elements of sustainability that are brought to scale. And that's a different role in the economy and maybe in the farming business than small-scale farms that are trying to pioneer new attributes and methods, like in the early phases of organic farming. What became a USDA organic farming standard was very early on a bunch of experimental farms. So I don't know anything, just to say it right out there, about how to run an experimental farm. Those farms play an important role in helping all of us understand what's possible and what might be brought to scale. But I have a bias that what really matters are numbers, and what you bring to scale, or how you change the practices of the scaled farming, is what really makes a difference, both in the world and in sustainability. So that's a very strong point of view. I'm not sure everybody would share it. Through that lens, we are mostly in the scaled farming business where we're in any kind of farming business. Even when we're doing experimental learning farms, we're trying to do it through the eyes of how do we scale this, and we're generally talking about 100 million or billion-dollar retail businesses, which means we're talking about millions of pounds, not thousands of pounds of yield at the end of a process. So we tend to have a very keen eye on the mainstream markets, or those attributes that are attractive across mainstream markets or will be one day. So organic is within that for some businesses. Organic poultry, for example, is not something we're active in today, but is something that we are actively considering and sometimes sourcing within the business portfolio. And certainly when we start talking about antibiotic-free practices, when we start talking about veg-fed, when we talk about other elements of sustainability, we are certainly in the adoption curve for those, but not at the front end generally of the adoption curve where we're vetting out what's possible. So that's a long-winded answer to, we're generally, with our independent farmers, practicing large-scale farming. We feel very strongly that that should not be feeling like factory farming, but it needs to produce output that is economically feasible for running through a factory and a consumer packaged goods supply chain, so that in the end Walmart can buy it and put it in 3,500 or 4,000 stores, and then all the other retailers that are involved in the go-to-market for consumers in the U.S. So, and that's just the U.S. market. When you start talking about feeding the world globally, you have to start talking about how do you scale things in a developing market, and how do you scale things in other situations. And those are all different questions, but still require fundamentally scale, even though they are well informed and should be informed by sustainability practices that are coming out of the smaller scale production environments. So hopefully that helps. It's maybe not a point of view that is shared by all smaller scale farmers, but we have to buy at scale in order to feed a growing market within a scaled economy.
Eric, it's a great answer, and actually, as I'm listening to you give it, it's spurring a couple of thoughts in my head that I wanted to follow up with before we go to the next question. So, first of all, I noticed as I'm watching that I'm nodding at various things, and you can't see me nod.
Nope.
I'm behind the camera. It's so interesting.
Just do this.
When you're talking. Just do this. I should do that. You're right. And you know, as you're talking, I'm looking up like this. It's because your face is over there and the camera's over here. There's so many interesting things about the technology that I'm still noticing on how to make it better. But the question I had, you talked about sort of being vertically integrated in your Tyson business with, and you talked about contracting with various like smaller or independent producers of the actual chickens.
Yeah, mostly family farms. It's over 90% family farms.
If I can build a bridge to what's going on here in Kern County, because I figured like we just grow other food here than what you use. But the business model is similar, and you know, I didn't used to know anything about agriculture before I moved out here, and it's been fascinating to me to start to learn how this industry works. And it sounds like there's a very similar business model for almonds. So we grow a hell of a lot of pistachios and almonds in this neck of the woods. And Blue Diamond almonds, have you heard those? Yeah. So Blue Diamond Almonds has like a co-op model.
Yep.
All of the almonds that go into Blue Diamond, like boxes and cans and stuff, they're grown by a like cacophony of different family-owned farms. We just had one of those farmers that has a relatively large farm here locally come in and talk about how he links into the bigger like Blue Diamond system. And it'd be interesting to hear you talk about, hear you elaborate slightly before you go to the next question on what makes a good family farm partner for you guys? Because honestly, I think the answer transfers directly over to. I imagine a lot of the same characteristics also apply for family farms here that are basically part of a bigger organization that is putting nuts and citrus into storage rather than chicken. So it'd be interesting to hear about the business model and what makes for a good family farm.
Yeah, no, it's not my area of expertise, honestly, but certainly a overall good business person and somebody who's dedicated to the work of farming, particularly in the food business with animals involved. The person who's running that operation is responsible for the welfare of the animals, and if they are balancing the business need with animal welfare, then we look good as an operation, and they look good as an operation. And if they're not the right, if they don't have the right training, or if they don't have the right people, or they don't have the right management practices, and the animals are mistreated, that reflects not only on their operation, but also on our brand when their product ultimately ends up in a brand. So that may not be as relevant, but I would imagine there are relevancies to that in nuts and fruits and such as well. Yeah, even though they may not. It may not directly translate. So I think business savvy, reliability, willingness to learn and change where it's been proven by others, either experimental others or by scale places, other places, to be flexible in that way where possible, and then and willingness more broadly to collaborate makes for great partnerships in all business endeavors and at farms included.
Cool. I think I want to make sure we get on to the next questions, but I think if we transfer over what you said, I mean, in general, being a maximally valuable, well-organized professional in general, translates to any small farm that fits into a bigger network. But I think all of the points you made about sort of ethical treatment of animals, in the case of nut farming, obviously, I don't know. You could make an existential point that plants are somehow living things too, but I think the bigger issue here is water sustainability in the state of California. The extent to which the farm is sensitive to the enormous amount of water that it takes to grow nut trees.
Yeah, great. So let me hit a few more of the blue ones because I gotta wrap up at 7. I don't know how long the class is.
No problem.
What's the proudest moment of your career thus far? I think the one that comes to mind that I like to talk about is actually back when I was in toilet cleaning, which has no end of pun and jokes that can be applied to it. But I actually worked in the toilet when I worked for the Clorox company back in California. We launched what's now called the Clorox Toilet Wand. It had a code name at the time, and the toilet tools were something that were relatively new to the market, and 5 or 6 of them, depending on how you count, launched almost at the same time, within 6 months of each other. We were last to the market, but we got the consumer insight right. The item that we launched was a stick, basically with impregnated with cleaning fluid cleaning pad on the end of it, that you could detach from the stick, throw away, and then put a new pad on. So that Clorox Toilet Wand really hit on the insight around the current behavior, which is liquid and a toilet brush, that was most poignant for consumers, which is, I hate that disgusting thing that I have to clean my toilet with, but nothing else cleans like it. And so what we did is hit the sweet spot with a lot of innovation happening all at the same time. Something that cleaned really well, but you also didn't have to keep using the same thing, and you could get rid of the gross part of it. And because of that, even though we launched last in the marketplace of 6 or 5, depending on how you count it, that brand is still the #1 share, bigger than we thought it was going to be before we knew everybody else was launching. So we benefited from everybody else opening the market and opening consumers' minds to using something that's a little bit more expensive but has some added feature, but then it attacked the dissatisfier most clearly of everything that launched and ended up out on top and winning the vast majority of the share in that market. So proud moment in the career and a lot of fun as well. Was moving to the East Coast difficult? Nope. The winter's hard when it's really cold, but this winter has been great. Generally speaking, I found that every place I move has good things and bad things, including where I grew up and came from. And it's been a huge benefit to my career being able to be flexible and follow great teams and great job situations rather than be closed in geographically. Some people make other choices, and closed in geographically has certainly benefits in life, consistency and proximity of friendships and family, etc. So that's part of something that I've given up, but I've gotten to live some great places and learned a lot from everywhere I've lived, and even though I love California. What else? Let me scroll down for other blues that you highlighted. Okay, good. What kinds of experience, paid or unpaid, would you encourage for anybody? This is Haley's question. For anybody pursuing a career in this field.
Haley, the one with less letters at the end. This is Haley Smith. You want to wave, Haley? Oh, wait. There. Wave again. That's her.
Hi, Haley. Great. You know, in packaged goods, we're focused on people who know how to run businesses and ideally consumer businesses. So one of the most interesting experiences that people bring into their interviews, and they can get at any stage, is the experience of selling something or making something to sell. Honestly, for a while, the most common experience of small business initiation or early stage working on a small business was around .coms and internet businesses, which is a little bit harder to translate. I personally would rather hear about a lemonade stand or you know, buying Otter Pops at Costco and then reselling them at the park on a cold day, and learnings and experiences of that, which are things people can do in elementary school. So I think that's probably obviously you wouldn't do the same experiences now, but having experience serving a customer with products and deciding what products and what product attributes to emphasize and to sell, it translates into these businesses very well. And then the other piece is just working on teams. So these are things you can accomplish in an academic environment or in an extracurricular environment, in a church environment, but working together to pull something off with individual accountability and ownership, but having to work with other people and through other people to accomplish the scale of something that you were trying to accomplish is a great experience that goes over really well in an interview because it indicates your capabilities on the job. What was the financial impact of your Go Meet advertising campaign? You know, I'm not sure I know exactly even what campaign you're talking about, so can you give a little bit more detail?
Eric, hang on one second. That was Jonathan. Can you wave, Jonathan? What campaign were you thinking of?
There were some commercials like a couple years ago that were pretty funny, actually. I just wondered what the measure of success on that was.
Specifically for Hilshire?
It was Hillshire.
Oh. Yeah. Did you hear the answer? Did you hear the answer?
No, not well.
No, not well.
Basically, it may have been like, it may have been before your time there, actually. Like, Jonathan was saying that a couple years ago there were a couple campaigns focused around the phrase "Go Meet," and it was a Hilshire brand, not a Tyson thing particularly. And he just noticed, he remembered the campaigns and was curious what was the final outcome of those. And it may have been before.
Yeah, great. I don't know the campaign specifically, so let me speak more generally to how we assess an advertising campaign. In general, first of all, before I get even into how we assess an advertising campaign, one of the things we're really proud of as a total company, and we're really proud of even as an independent Hillshire brand, is we felt like we had advantaged brands in advantaged categories. So that means brands that were set up to win for one reason or another, because of the brand equity, ideally, or some other source of competitive advantage, in a category that was also set up to win within the broader context of consumer packaged goods and the grocery store people shop in. Most of the time, those advantage categories were advantaged because they were meat-centric. They were protein-centric more broadly. And so many of our advertising campaigns leverage those category benefits or brand benefits within a broader category that's not exclusively protein-based in trying to drive success for the business. So Go Meat, I don't know the campaign, but it sounds like an example of that. And there are probably, I couldn't count on one hand how many of those types of approaches we've taken. In the end, when we launch new advertising, or when we develop new advertising, we take a very methodological approach. Usually we're spending millions of dollars on advertising campaigns, sometimes tens of millions of dollars. And so we have to be careful that that money is going to be well spent. Before we launch advertising, we go through a development process that's based on strategy that then yields proto ads of some sort that we test in advertising testing. We're usually using a big research company to do that and simulating a distracted environment and simulating the final ad as well, usually with something that's kind of cartoonish, etc., like hand-drawn. That's in a clutter reel. I'm using air quotes again. A clutter reel of some kind, like a pilot TV show. And the person who's participating in the research thinks they're reviewing the show, but they're also being shown advertising along the way, and they're somehow the research company is researching their interest in the brand and their thoughts about the brand, both before and after exposure to the ad, and before and after exposure to that same TV show without the ad in it. So we're trying to use an advertising test to measure the effect of the ad. When those tests go well, we measure a persuasion effect, and as well, usually with a phone call a few days afterwards, a recall effect of the advertising. So when somebody has seen it, they recall it, they remember which brand it's associated with, and they're persuaded by the ad as well, using the research methodology to measure those three things. If those three things are true, we're pretty confident that spending a lot of money on the ad makes a lot of sense, and we take a campaign to market. And then we use different marketplace measurement techniques, some that are shorter term and others longer term. The ultimate marketplace measurement technique in our business, because it's very difficult to tie actual sales to advertising in packaged goods where you're doing offline sales, not online sales. When you sell online, it's a little easier to actually tie because you can measure somebody's path through websites and what they click on and buy. But when it's offline, you have to use statistical methods, generally speaking. And so we use what's called mix analytics to measure the different effects that are taking place in a market, including advertising, and then the sales that are happening in that time period and time periods after that, and try and use complex statistical regression models to attribute advertising and other drivers to the end sales. And when you measure that in the millions, you usually get great statistical effects, and you end up understanding how many individual products were sold, statistically speaking, based on $1 million in advertising. And when you spend that $1 million in advertising and get an effect that says you're going to move 2 million pounds, you can then apply a profit model to that where you know that you moved 80 cents on the dollar in the short term, measurable, and that you built a long-term lasting effect that goes beyond that, and that's usually the assumption. So in consumer packaged goods, you're measuring before you go to market and then usually after you go to market, sometimes months after, where you can get all the data in a time series and really truly decouple all of the effects and measure how many cases you move for that ad running. And so that's the ultimate measure, and I would imagine if it stayed on air, we saw great measurable effects for the campaign. And ideally, we actually measured what worked and what didn't work and tweaked the campaign to make it work even better and more financially efficiently.
Eric, I think it's about 1 minute until 5 our time, 7 your time. First of all, before I forget, I've started recording my various guest lectures so that people can go back and listen to them later, and that I have a record of everything. I don't think we talked about anything proprietary, but if you don't want me to post your recording for some reason, just
No, it's okay. I didn't say anything secret.
I didn't think so, but I wanted to make sure. I didn't tell you that beforehand. I forgot. So then, finally, does anybody have a last question that wasn't addressed? Let's first of all give Eric a big round of applause. And I'll say as a closing note, it's always awesome to have you talk to the class, and just because, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Sorry.
Yeah, I am. Sorry.
There we go. Sorry.
There we go. It's awesome to have you talk to the class anytime because just of your level of professionalism, but it's really interesting for me now to hear the front end or the tail end, depending on which end you're looking from, of the food value chain, because we're at the tail end of it here. It's really interesting because everything you talk about judging a successful advertising campaign, like the kinds of metrics that you're managing on a day-to-day basis to see projects at Tyson succeed, it's radically different than the metrics that the producers around here go from. But the whole process is connected, and I hope you have a chance to, I hope you're interested and available to talk to future classes, because I personally got a lot out of connecting the dots of our back end here and how it eventually integrates into what you're doing. It was really cool to listen to. So thank you from a personal standpoint. It's going to benefit future students as well because I learned a lot.
Great. Well, thanks to everyone for the great questions and good luck. And let me know if I can answer anything offline afterwards that we couldn't fit in the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. Take care, and tell Sheffy and the girls.
I will. I'll tell them they look better now than they did in that old picture too.
Tell them definitely they get better every year.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, see ya. Okay, that's it. Julian, follow me. I'll get you a ticket. Everybody else? Mason, you take that directly to the... you go now, they're probably still open. Otherwise, you'll have to bring it to them tomorrow. And that should be it. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
There you go. Little enthusiasm with me.
All you need is the annual revenues. Once you've got that, just basically, you're going to calculate. For example, gross profit.
I think money left too. One of the cases we did, so you guys, 20 minutes. But we ended up getting a 100%. That's something.
Takes the fact that they have 5 million revenue, and the fact that the average cost of goods sold in the average gross profit margin in the industry is 3%. The far right that percentage, annual revenue, all you need, and the instructions itself. How to calculate. You want all the instructions. I could probably meet right now. I got stuff to do. I'll just back here after this one. Otherwise, I'm going to be running around to the very tomorrow. Even though I'm not teaching that day. So depending on if you're ready, I'm going to bring it Wednesday. for tomorrow. You've got my cell phone, right? Text me and we'll figure out a time when I'm on campus and not. Okay. Cool. I still owe you like the final to do. Deadline's the end of finals week. I will look at it. You're going to get an A. I want to so I need to sit down and spend like half an hour just thinking about your company and then give you finals. So we're just ready. And the deadline will be 16, but honestly, if you get through cool. I will be in touch soon. Okay, cool. What's that? Let me keep talking. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I just want to make sure. I want to make sure to make a before the other class comes in. I need to get the recording that I made off of this hard drive here. Hang on just 1 second, okay? I'm sorry. I think it's 2307. Mason, what's up? Matt, hey, it's Jeremy Woods. I'm doing well, man. So you guys were trying to help me with my little help desk problem of trying to get a big file off of the desktop here in the classroom onto my thumb drive. I'm standing in front. I got 8 minutes, and I'm standing in front of it. So if you can figure out, if you can tell me what to do, I think you said we need to format my thumb drive in some other format. You want to tell me? You may tell you the help desk ticket number. Okay. That's okay. Matt, hang on 1 second. Okay, one of my students had a question. Okay, I'll be right back. About the presentation. Yes. So, best time you can either come by my office like now, as soon as I'm done here, or text me during the day tomorrow. I'll be going to various classes, making presentations, and we can just set it down. Yeah. So either right now after class, as soon as I get there, or just text me tomorrow when we talk. Okay. Okay, that's cool. Okay, are you still there? So what do I do? Yeah. Well, I could empty it back off again, but no, there's nothing important on it. Okay, I'm going to plug it into the desktop right now, okay? What's that? Sorry, I'm trying to multitask. What? You sure?
Yeah,
okay.
It's all right.
Christian, what do you need?
I was just going to ask you a question about wait for when you were done.
Yeah, just wait for me. I'm heading back to the office as soon as I'm done here. Yes, if you want, you can take those bags and bring that stuff back to my office, and I'll be there in a sec. Okay. The thumb drive should be attached. Let me open it up here. Yep, it's already empty. What do we do? Okay. Yeah. Hang on. Yep. Got it. It's FAT 32 right now. Okay. And allocation unit size, does that matter? Okay, and then click start. And then as soon as it's done formatting, okay. And as soon as that's done, I can try and transfer it again. Awesome, dude. If it doesn't, I'll call you back. Okay, I'll call you back no matter what. I'm going to try and answer a student question now, but if that's all I have to do, I'm just going to wait for this thing to finish formatting and then... Actually, here, hang on. It actually starts. Yeah, okay, that's already done. Oh, Julian. Yes. Get a ticket from Cassie. Okay. And Cassie, make sure to write down which ticket you got, could you? Okay. So, actually, it just finished formatting. I'm going to try it right now, man. Hang on. Desktop. Oh, no.
I'll get one now.
I've been recording the whole time. Okay, stop.